Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Paint Mind Studio. Today I will be showing you how to draw with a paintbrush and watercolors using my own holiday/Christmas cookies as inspiration. I will cover everything including how to easily add texture and how you can emphasize little details in order to add dimension and depth. This is a fun one guys, so get comfy and let's paint some cute little cookies that will look just about good enough to eat. Alright, so today I am using one of my favorite watercolor sketchbooks, the Handbook Journal from Speedball Art Products. As always, all the materials I use will be linked down below in the description box. I am starting off with one of my Escoda travel brushes in a size number 6. The first color I'm going to start with is just a plain yellow ochre, but very watered down. I've added a lot of water to it in order to make it very light. And I'm using the paintbrush to kind of outline the shape of my little gingerbread man cookie, and then I'm filling it in essentially with that watered down yellow ochre. And I'm going over it 1 or 2 more times to make sure that it stays nice and wet. Not puddly, but just wet enough so that I can add another color for the shadows. I'm going in with burnt sienna, just on the bottom left of the little cookie, because our imaginary light source is on the upper right hand corner. So the shadows are going to be on the bottom left corner. So I'm using burnt sienna while the yellow ochre is still wet so that it blends in a little bit. Now with the yellow ochre again watered down, I'm adding this upper cookie, this upper round cookie. Now I'm taking some clean water and I'm splattering it to add this nice little texture, because this is a coconut cookie and it's got some white little hole-like indentations that you can see once it's baked. And so in order to indicate that, I'm adding splashes of water so that they spread randomly and create these nice little white blooms that actually create some really nice texture for cookies like this. I'm going in again with the burnt sienna while it's all wet to add the little shadow on the bottom. And now I'm painting or drawing with the paintbrush these little crescents. They're like little walnut crescents. And the color that I use for this is still the yellow ochre, but I've added a little tiny bit of burnt umber and a little tiny bit of Payne's gray, just so that it's not so yellow. You'll see it more once it dries that the color is slightly different, because it's a walnut cookie, so it ends up not being very yellow once it's baked, and I'm trying to make it look as accurate as possible to how they come out when I bake them, so that's why I changed the color up a little bit. And to add interest and to make it look a little bit more realistic and to add dimension, I'm adding 2 more cookies around that first one. Now I'm moving on to the Christmas tree cookie. For that one, I went back to just the yellow ochre, but a little bit more watered down. I'm making sure the whole thing is wet by adding just a little bit of clean water and spreading it out. And I'm using burnt sienna for the little shading on the edges. For the crescents, I actually used a little bit of burnt umber for the shadows, not burnt sienna. I'm moving on to these little hazelnut cookies. Oh my gosh, I'm getting hungry just looking at this. These little cookies have a whole little hazelnut that goes in the center of them. So I left a little white area, this kind of short, chubby, tear-shaped area in the center of the cookies, where I'm going to be painting in the hazelnut a little bit later on. I'll show you how to do that. But in order to keep that little hazelnut coloring clean, I left a blank area for it. And I'm using, again, burnt sienna for the little shading at the bottom. And I did splatter these a little bit beforehand with clean water to get just a little bit of texture, a little bit of those white blooms again. I'm changing brushes now. I'm moving on to a number 2 brush to emphasize the little shading, the little shadows on the bottom edges of the cookies. And for that, I'm using burnt umber. But I'm also making sure not to cover up all of the burnt sienna. I'm really just placing this burnt umber right at the edge. Here I'm adding little gumdrops to my gingerbread man by using cadmium-free red and sap green. Just a pure color, not doing any mixtures or anything. And I've left little white areas, or I haven't filled it all in completely, to show the little shine that the gumdrops have. Now I'm switching to my Winsor & Newton Cotman round brush in a size 0 to add the little eyes and the little smile, because the cookie cutter has little indentations to create the eyes and the smile. And I'm adding little shadows to the gumdrops using burnt sienna. And then I'm mixing a sepia by using burnt umber and Payne's gray. I'm using that little bit of sepia right underneath the edge of the gumdrop just to emphasize their little shadow, to show that there are these 3-dimensional things on top of the little gingerbread man's chest there. Now I'm using burnt umber on the walnut crescents, again to add depth to the shading. And also, I forgot to mention that I used the burnt umber to add all of these little tiny random dots to the crescents because it's a walnut dough, so all these little walnut dots end up being on the dough. For the Christmas tree, I'm using sap green to add what is essentially this green icing. So we're basically decorating the cookies in watercolor. It's so fun. I'm actually adding, with a little bit of Payne's gray, these little shadows on the left sides of the little icing, the little green icing, again to make it 3-dimensional. I'm going back in with burnt umber to add deeper shading to the bottoms of all these little edges of the tree. Now I'm going in with burnt umber to paint the little hazelnuts in the cookies at the top. While the burnt sienna is still wet, I'm going in with burnt umber in the areas that I just painted and letting it blend in. And once it's dry, I'm taking a little burnt sienna again to add little tiny thin stripes in the white areas that I left. I'm doing the same thing to the upper hazelnut here and to the left hazelnut. I'm using burnt umber to add little irregular dots and slashes to these cookies as well. And I'm using the same burnt umber to emphasize the shading, especially on the overlapping cookies underneath. Those are going to have a little bit of a deeper shadow. Now I'm using a rigger brush. It's an Escoda rigger brush size 0, and that one is really good to help me get really thin lines as well as slightly thicker lines. And I'm using the tip of that brush to add little tiny clumps that represent the little clumps of chocolate that are created when you drizzle melted chocolate over cookies. If you've ever done that, you know what I mean. I'm doing the same thing to the hazelnut cookies on the top, but I'm being more deliberate. I'm doing contour shading for these cookies because the hazelnuts are sitting on top. So I'm following the curve of the shapes. So you don't want to do just a line going straight over everything because then it's not gonna look three-dimensional like what we're trying to do. So you have to follow each curve individually. Follow the contour. Then I'm taking the size 0 brush again to make some of those chocolate stripes thicker because that's how they are. And I'm also adding more shading to the coconut cookies and adding a little bit of clean water to soften the lines. Now I'm mixing a violet mixture by using permanent rose and Payne's gray, very, very watered down to make this shadow color. And I'm adding that to the left side, to the bottom of the cookies. Again, to add dimension so that they're not just floating in the air. I'm deepening the color a little bit right on the edges that are closest to the cookies. Now I'm taking my white Posca paint marker and I'm adding little squiggly lines to the arms and the legs of the gingerbread man to represent the white icing that one would normally put on the gingerbread man. I'm also putting little highlights in the eyes and on the gumdrops. I'm whitening more of those areas that I left blank. I'm adding little highlights to the chocolate drizzles because if you look at melted chocolate drizzle, once it's dry on a cookie, they're very shiny, so they do have these white areas. And I'm adding little lines and dots to the green icing on the Christmas tree cookie. Now I'm adding, with burnt sienna, just a little tiny shadow line to the left side of the white icing and the bottom of the white icing on the legs. Again, to add dimension. And that's it. We've reached the end. Oh, these are so fun to paint. And I'm signing it because why not? It's my work. And look at it. Here's a close-up. Aren't they so cute? They look so yummy. I want to go eat them. I hope you enjoyed it, guys. And if you decide to try it, then that would be great. Just don't get hungry. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already done so. All right, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.